Alright. Schmuck is here. I guess I'll just pay attention to chat if everything sounds okay. There's like a 15-second delay, so I apologize. Just let me know in the chat if like everything sounds fine. I was told last night that it's like a little too quiet as a whole, so I recommend like turning it up. Put on some anime openings. I have like just a generic lo-fi stream on right now. I'm worried YouTube will take it down. Nothing sounds better than not getting sued. We'll probably wait a little after 2:05 just to let some folks come in. Any stragglers. Alrighty. We'll give it a bit more time. If Neil is still here, congratulations. Now, anyone who's watching, feel free to just say your name so I know like who's in here. Zacchaeus. I'm setting in a last call. I guess this is my like counterpoint to Sheridan that we're going to be acting out today. I get in trouble for that. Hello, new people. Feel free to say your name. I know we have some third years coming, I think, today. We'll get started up shortly. I have a very jerry-rigged way of doing this. Like, I want to know which slides ahead, so I have like a tablet set up with like the shit that's like right there. Mad of all trades. I'm really nervous, but I'm really excited about this. Those that know me know I like want to be a teacher one day for either like 11th or 12th grade or post-secondary. So I'm excited, but I'm nervous. But this will be fun. I'll also, for anyone who's not going to be here for the whole thing, I obviously recommend you do, in case you have any questions, but I'm going to archive this and I'll send a link after the fact. Nice to meet you as well, Matt. I am presuming you are in 3rd year. But yes, I'll be archiving this, because I know there's some people who are interested in it, but won't be able to watch over it. I don't know if streams let you, like, bookmark segments in the same way YouTube videos let you do that. I'll figure it out, just so that you can... Regardless, I'll like timestamp it, because we do have a bit to get through. I talk fast, so if anyone needs me to like slow down, how long am I planning to go? I'm gonna aim for 3. It might go over, might go under. If there's any time before 3, we'll probably just take questions or anything like that. There's some questions from the Google form that'll also just kind of get answered throughout what we're going to talk about, but there will be some at the tail end. And if anyone has any questions, we'll make sure to answer those. We're going to speed run this in 3 minutes. We're going to Mario 64 backwall glitch into this workshop. Let me get my slides ready. I don't normally listen to music while I work, but I wanted to make sure this wasn't like a boring Zoom call, so I'm gonna keep the music on because it's non-copyright, but it is jarring. Okay, well this seems like a good place to start, so I guess we'll get started now. Alrighty. I think a lot of the people that are in here are already 4th years, but who knows, I know there's at least a couple 3rd years. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Sam. I'm a 4th year in film and television, but I've had a very interesting year the past year with regards to animation, and I wanted to do this workshop as a means of exercising maybe some more engaging ways of online learning, at least the way I would do it before we get started with the semester. I really have no idea how busy things are going to be once things start, so I wanted to get this in right at the front end and have some fun with it, and if there's any interest in it, we'll do more of them. Something I'd like to emphasize early on is that this is animation as an addition. This is not animation as an alternative to film. We're going to be talking a lot about what I like to call the big 3 and how to not switch gears but add gears to your tool set so that you can expand your avenues and expand the cool stuff you get to work on, because I think we all want that. So we'll be covering a lot of that. I guess just to get started, academic policy, don't be an asshole in chat. Ask questions. You're free to ask questions when we're on it. Again, we'll be moving a little quickly, but feel free to just ask anything you like, and I'll answer it as quickly as I can. We will have a question period at the end as well, and this isn't on here, but again, we will be archiving this, so just make sure to be respectful. So some of the stuff we're going to be covering today, we'll be talking about the state of the entertainment industry, what I like to call the big 3, like I mentioned earlier. I'll be giving some anecdotal experience, a bit about the year I've had to give myself a little bit of credibility as to what I'm talking about, because I don't think you should just blindly believe what I'm going to be talking about. We'll be asking why animation, why this is a thing maybe you're considering if you're here. The pros and cons of the industry. I do want to give a bit of a nuanced take on the industry. I want to be transparent in ways it's ahead of film, in ways where it still has some catching up to do. We'll be talking about your potential connection to animation, why you're interested in this. If you're in film already, you already have a personal connection to this, so animation would be no different. We'll be covering some hiring tips, general application stuff, things that I wish were covered in the co-op and Business 1 course for the third years entering this year. Things that I wish I knew starting out, and things that I think will help you even outside animation, but just good practice stuff. And this is animation, but we will be... someone's asking me to turn down the music a bit. Ooh. This is animation, but we will be covering some compositing stuff, some After Effects stuff. If there is interest in After Effects stuff beyond this course, especially anyone taking Digital Suite 1 or already has taken Digi Suite, I am considering doing a inside After Effects comp workshop where we can work together and work on some shots together. I can provide material. I've already gotten approval on that, but that'll just come down to interest. If there's anywhere from 7 to 10 people that are just interested in this, I have some opportunities I'm happy to throw your way. Today's goals. I want to spark animation as an interest. If you're already here, you're probably at least a little interested in this. And I want to help you expand your career horizons. I want you to expand all the things that you're interested in. Like I said earlier, we all want to work on cool stuff. We all want to work on the biggest stuff we can. So I want to do whatever I can to give you, any more tools in your kit. I want you to pay attention to animation after this in a different way. I want you to keep in mind of tricks that are used in the same way you would with your film practice, with cinematography, editing, sound, and so on. And some interest in After Effects, if that's a thing you're already kind of interested in. I think some of the editors will already kind of gauge some interest in that, at least from what I've gotten from the survey. But we'll be talking about transferring skill sets later. Something I do want to get out of the way pretty soon is we do have to talk about some stuff we already all know, just to kind of context. So the elephant in the room is that the film industry is kind of in the shitter right now. It's not in a good spot. It's not where we want it to be. All the fourth years in here know this. We know it's going to be very troubling for a bit. Some things I hope we already know is that the film industry is not going to be back to normal the day a vaccine is released. I know some people are optimistic because some of the bigger studios are already getting back on shooting. I would wager that's because they literally can't afford to delay, and I think you could question some of the ethics of that. It is going to be a slow progression upwards to whatever the new normal is for this industry. And I don't want the way core and thesis is going to play out this year give you an expectation of what the industry might look like right out of grad, because it still might be, or right out of grad or into your co-ops, because we don't know when we're in this shit for the long run. We don't know when this is going to be wrapped up. So another thing we already know for those who were able to find co-ops is that the power is in remote work right now. If you were able to sit at a desk and accomplish a task in your home, you are already doing pretty well in the context of the pandemic. Now that we already have that shit out of the way, let's talk about which industries survived and thrived and why. Let's give a nuanced take on that. If you were to make a comprehensive smash tier list of all of the industries right now, I would wager animation is towards the top. You have game design and graphic design that were able to adapt fairly well. Marketing and illustration did close to the same. I mean, how many we here at Paper really care about this uncertain time? A lot of that stuff. VFX has just remained in D tier because it's treated very poorly and was not treated any better with a pandemic. You have post-secondary industries like Sheridan who are taking money. And we have film that, at least for the time being, is at the bottom. It's obviously not always like this, but in the context of the pandemic, I think this is a fairly accurate take of what industries did well. But if we move on to the big three, this is how I like to visualize the big three. As far as entertainment goes within our sphere, I would wager animation, film, and game design are the main three, the big three, that if you have skill sets in one of these, it's very likely you have skill sets that you can transfer to the other two as well. And this is really nice because you can transfer skill sets to make you a lot more powerful. Again, the power is in the remote, at least for the indefinite future. And being powerful means you're able to work on cooler stuff. You're able to move around really quickly. Say, God forbid something like this happens again, you're able to move to animation or game design, or say something happens to one of the other two, you're able to move around and be very malleable, which is very attractive to aspects of the industry. It triples your networking opportunities. I mean, again, you get to either double or triple the amount of people you know, the things you get to work on, the studios you get to work for. So I would wager you shouldn't limit your opportunities to just working in film or TV. I know BFTV has an emphasis on especially film, but also a little bit of television. There's advertising, music videos, game cinematics. If you want to shoot for your big Hollywood stuff, a lot of game cinematics are shot in live action these days for advertisement purposes. A lot of your corporate stuff, which is where a lot of us tend to start out, location and art development is a bit of a niche, but if you want to, sometimes for big movies, like location art development, like for stuff like Lion King, going out on scout and like gathering data on locations for them to apply to the film, it's a bit of a niche, and it's a bit flexible in that way that it can kind of be applied to a few key things, but it's definitely an avenue. Sports and esports and live broadcasting, and obviously transmedia, as Randall has drilled into our heads. Coming up next is a thing I really want to emphasize, not just in animation, but across whatever skill sets you have, is I want you to forget the idea of the master of none. I think there's a bit of a trend that goes on that if you possess more than one or even two skill sets, then you're a master of none, and that you'll never be fantastic at any of them because you have to devote yourself entirely to one or two practices. And one of the greatest lessons I learned, and it really opened my horizons once I started paying attention to it, is that the master of one is the connector of none. If you cannot connect skill sets to one another, you may be struggling more than necessary. If you are able to connect skill sets together, you can widely expand not just what you're doing in your specific practice, say like camera editing, visual effects, sound, but just your problem solving ability, because you have this greater roster of techniques you can use to solve problems. So I think that's a really important thing. Be willing to expand your skill sets because you can connect them in ways you might not think you'd be able to do. Now I want to give myself a little bit of credibility as to what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to talk about me for a little bit. This is the part of every professor's lecture where they talk about the things they work on. So let's rewind a bit to February. February 2020. Pre-COVID, or at least pre-pandemic in that regard. So I was initially considering going to Deluxe for visual effects. I had a good friend of mine who worked there for a few summers. I would have been able to get in touch with them fairly easily. I had some nuke skills, and I would have been able to build it enough to get hired there. But I had a growing interest in 2D animation. My fourth years that know me, know that my partner is an animator. She's a fantastic animator. So obviously I'm around animators a lot. And it started to pique my interest a bit. On a whim, I just went all in on animation, said this is what I'd like to do for my co-op placement. And I applied to a dozen or so studios, ranging from local GTA stuff, like Guru, and we'll be talking about a lot of Toronto studios later on, to places like Powerhouse and Titmouse, and shooting my shot to Nickelodeon, like whatever. We'll talk about applying later and why stuff like that is important. Powerhouse, which makes Castlevania, they do a web series called Epithet Erased. From what I know, they do a fair amount of web series stuff. And Titmouse, which does Midnight Gospel, which is on Netflix. They did the original Avatar, The Last Airbender intro. They're working on Animaniacs right now. They did Neo Yokio for Netflix. They did the Captain Underpants show. They did Metalocalypse. They do a lot of stuff. And they've experienced a lot of growth within the past year. So, after a lot of applications that didn't go great, ranging from non-replies to studios no longer hiring because at this point the pandemic was taking off, Titmouse gets back to me and asks me to do a test with them. They sent me some revisions. I guess I did well because they asked me to do an interview, and I get offered a 3-month remote contract for an upcoming Netflix IP. I deliberately didn't want to talk too much about since the pandemic, I never had where I work, but I didn't want to talk about what I was working on. I mean, I still can't talk about what I'm working on, but it just didn't seem very tasteful in the context of the pandemic really taking off and a lot of co-op opportunities being gutted. It's still a thing I'm still weird about talking about, but yes, for the past 4 months I have been working on a new Netflix IP. Meanwhile, this is something that, if you know me, I have posted about a fair bit. This is Nima, which was basically an anime intro done by Ross Tran or Ross Draws on Instagram or Twitter and YouTube. He's a very popular artist. He wanted to make it to go alongside an art book release, as well as kind of a pitch package for a potential series, which is why it was like a series intro. I worked on this technically from around February to August 2020, although February was mostly development stuff, and then it kind of had a lull until like May to August. It was a really good learning experience. It was very challenging. Shortly before Nima wrapped, I was offered an 8-month contract for Titmouse with plans to relocate to Vancouver after graduation. And as of very recently, I am in talks with Powerhouse for potential opportunities as well. So now that we're all caught up, let's be nuanced and ask ourselves, why animation specifically? So I want to talk a bit about professionalism, because I think it's an area that film does have some progress to be made on. Live action media is very broad, and my conclusion from that is when you have an industry that's fairly broad, it's going to borrow things from other broad industries. And I think that at least early on in film, like early on into your graduation, especially the co-op process, there is a lot of like, here is my resume. Here, like, your reel is obviously among the most important parts, but your resume and your degree, I would wager, matters more in film getting into the door. Once you've got a good roster and stuff, that's not gonna really matter. Alternatively, animation is really tightly knit. It's got kind of a unique set of customs that make it a little different from other industries. Anecdotally speaking, animation tends to be a bit more bubbly. It's very community driven, and it's generally like supportive of one another. There's not necessarily any, I'm not going to say there's not any, but it's far less competitive from individual to individual in animation. It is easier to get money out the gate compared to film. I guess to throw out some numbers, I think when we did the co-op course last year, the unpaid BFTV internships were in excess of 70%. So 70% of internships were completely unpaid, and a large sect of those paid internships were from the Sheridan Production House. I would wager at least a third of them. With animation, I want to say, based off what I've gathered, unpaid internships are around anywhere from 20 to 25, maybe 30%. I would be comfortable saying around 25%, which is a big gap. That's a 50% drop between people who are getting paid. And I don't think that's anything to snuff at. Something we'll be talking more about applying later, but something I think that's very important, especially for animation, but that you can also apply to film, is the ideal candidate myth. This is something I really wish the co-op and business courses talked about, because I think this would make applying a lot easier. Apply to a job or a studio even if you do not meet the education or experience requirements. At the end of the day, film and especially animation is a very expensive medium. Animation is very expensive to produce. Studios cannot afford to arbitrarily pick people based on experience. It's just a method to weed out people. So if your reel is good and you are presenting yourself well, they will care more about the work than anything else. Your reel is your representation of what you are capable of. And if they ask you to do a test in the case of animation, that is an even bigger reflection of how you work. Tidmouse didn't even know I was a student until the interview. I mentioned it in my email, my CV, and my resume, and it didn't cross their mind until the interview, which it tells me that they like glanced at it and didn't really care. They just looked at the reel and sent me a test. And even after the fact, the only thing they were a little concerned about was the fact that it would have been my first industry job, and that was a little, I don't want to say it was worrisome to them, but they were like, you need to make sure you can pull your weight because this is what it's like. Some of the downsides to animation, marginalized groups that are affected in other areas of the entertainment industry are still affected in this regard. I would wager not as much. It is a little better. What I will say is that LGBT people tend to be more welcome in the animation industry. I think it's because, as someone who's technically under that umbrella, you feel like a misfit, and I think animation is typically just a home to people who feel like they're misfits. So I would wager it's more welcoming to LGBT plus individuals. Free testing is an issue that is sometimes used to get free labor. So for those of you that don't know what testing is in animation, we'll be talking about compositing later, but say you're applying to be a compositor, they see your reel, and they go, okay, here is a shot we are going to give you, and we want you to comp it. And we will give you these guidelines in which you're supposed to composite it. If you do well, we'll give you feedback, or we'll give you an interview or something like that. That's what a test is. Sometimes it's used to get free labor. You can ask for a paid test. There are some nuances about this. It's tricky. What I'm about to say is not condoning this. It shouldn't be like this, but when you're just starting out and say you don't have much experience on your back, saying like, I want a paid test can sometimes be a bad look to studios. They might look over you. It shouldn't be like that, but it sometimes is. It's more reasonable to ask for a paid test it's always reasonable to ask for a paid test, or at least it should be, but it's more reasonable if it's, for whatever reason, they're asking you to comp something or work on something for a test that would be for that show. Because that means, say if they don't hire you, that's basically free labor they got out of you. So you can reasonably ask for a paid test. But for my test I did for Titmouse, it was for a show that had long aired, so I didn't complain much about it. The industry is based in key areas, although this is something we're already kind of used to because of film. So Toronto, Vancouver, LA, New York, a few studios in Texas, powerhouses in Texas. Rooster Teeth is in Texas, although I wouldn't necessarily recommend Rooster Teeth as a workplace. But again, we're already kind of used to that. I would just wager it's even more centralized than, say, film is. So let's talk about connection. Let's talk about making this yours, why you're potentially interested in this avenue, why this is a thing you're even remotely considering. When I go back and consider the moment I at least started toying with the idea of working in animation, it goes back to this tweet. This is a tweet, let's see, so 2.5 years ago, from Samuel Dietz, who's the director of the director of Castlevania, which is made by Powerhouse, saying they were hiring compositors, and this shot here is from just a breakdown they did from the first season, and I was blown away when I saw it. I didn't know there was a demand for this sort of work, at least in the West, because anime has high level compositing, but I didn't know there was necessarily a need for stuff like this. So it piqued my interest, and it was always in the back of my head up until 6 to 8 months ago, where I pretty much decided that's where I wanted to be working. Something I'd also recommend is, when you're considering going into something like animation, consider I like to think of it in terms of what are the 4 or 5 key things that inspire you to work in a field. So with film, everyone has their top 5 films. For me, it's these 5. And I don't want any nasty comments saying, why is Space Jam in your 5 inspirations for animation? Space Jam is killer compositing, okay? It has amazing technique. It advanced on the techniques they use for Roger Rabbit and things like that. I fuck with Space Jam. But stuff like Castlevania, I would say Castlevania and Your Name are my 2 biggest draws to work in comp and animation, because the work on that is absolutely breathtaking. I could watch Your Name all day, every day, just because of how beautiful the digital work in that film is. I would also recommend if you're interested in comp, watch Pokemon Twilight Wings. It's like a mini series they were doing for the Sword and Shield games that came out this year. Beautifully done, easily the best Pokemon has ever looked on screen. And I recommend watching Klaus. I mean, like 3 to 4 of these things. I think Space Jam is on Netflix. 4 to 5 of these things you can watch today, and Your Name you can just like torrent it. But these are definitely great like first draft picks if you're interested in comp work and animation. Great case studies all around. So consider why you're considering animation. What is your real into it? What is it about this career path that interests you as an addition? Again, the power is in the remote. Do you like to work at a desk and get things done? Are you a colorist? Pokemon Go, like. Are you a colorist, an editor, motion graphics, VFX artist, soundy? These are jobs that are already kind of used to working in a desk environment, so maybe you'll find you can transfer those skill sets a little easier. I want to clarify, you don't need to be in any of these. Like I also said earlier, the master of one is the connector of none. If you're a cinematographer, a director, or writer, and you just want to crack open After Effects and learn it, like, go for it. It's totally valid, and you can totally learn it. Soundies. I don't know a ton about the sound pipeline, I don't know a ton about the soundy workflow in animation. What I do know is that sound is amazing for like your core sound designers, people who just love to manipulate sound, because animation obviously isn't built as much on realism. There's still like very real Foley work you have to do. But if you're interested in just manipulating sounds to make new and very specific things, animation is great, because at least from what I've gathered, the only way you're going to get it to that degree, is fantasy or sci-fi with film. I mean, you watch something like Castlevania, and like the sound on that is so specific, because there's all this like magic stuff that's a part of it. It's great for your sound designers. And what's also kind of unique about sound, I've worked in sound. You're right, there are a lot of jobs in Toronto, and what I will say is that sound as an industry tends to be tight in the way that animation is. So if you're a soundy and you've already reached out to soundy, Zachy, if you're watching this, I know you've kind of indicated that as well, where like soundies tend to like stick together like that. You're already kind of used to that. What is, I would say, the most different thing about sound and animation is that in sound with film, you're working at the tail end, right? Like after picture lock is in, you're doing your sound editing or your mix. With animation, you're at the front end and the tail end, because you have to do your, I guess, like a glorified scratch track, basically your rough mix, with your dialogue. If it is music, you have rough music in there, any sound effects that would be in the film, because the animators obviously need to know that, right, to like animate lip syncing or any props or things like that. And then you come in at the end again, once you have picture lock, once your animation, your comp, and your edit's done, you come in for the final mix again. So sound for animation is definitely something I'm looking at, so if that's the case, that's awesome. Yeah, and from what I've heard as well, sound in Toronto is very, like, it's booming. And from what I've heard, Vancouver is fairly similar. Let's talk about some general tips for applying. Obviously have some experience first. Don't go applying willy-nilly without a reel. For those that are interested in compositing, reach out to me after this. Feel free to message me, whatever, because if there's enough interest in like doing a mini After Effects course, I'm thinking maybe like 2 to 3 workshops, I'm happy to do that. I'm more than happy to do that. Because if you're interested in doing this, once you get some practice with it, and I'm happy to provide that material, you can then start reaching out to some of the 3rd and 4th year films and say, like, I have this experience with compositing, I'd like to get some more experience with compositing, because a lot of the animation students, they either don't like to composite typically, or they like don't really know how. So it's a great niche. Also, animation students don't know anything about sound, so if you are a soundy and you have some experience with sound design, the 3rd and 4th year films are amazing opportunities to do that. The 3rd year films tend to be a little longer, so keep that in mind. They tend to range from, like, I want to say like 5 to 6 minutes maybe, whereas fourth year films tend to be a little shorter. They can range anywhere from like a minute and a half to 4 minutes. It really depends. I think it's a pretty open runtime you can pick for your fourth year film, because it's the idea is that like that's the sum of your skills, so you can kind of choose. Something that is really important that really helped me in both the opportunities I've gotten invested in Titmouse and recent discussions with Powerhouse is add recruiters on LinkedIn. It's very helpful. Now, I don't mean after this just start like adding a bunch of recruiters, but after you apply to a studio, and this applies to film, if you're applying to Mr. X, Deluxe, whatever, after you apply, LinkedIn shows who their HR managers are, who their HR recruiters are. You can add them, and it helps you in the algorithm. Because if they're looking for someone to fill a role and they already have you, guess who's going to be at the top of that list? So it's a very good tip that I would recommend, especially the third years utilize for co-op season. After you apply to a studio, what is this music that is playing? Oh, this is a completely different thing that's playing. Hold on. Some like YouTube videos started playing in the background. Let's fix that up. Okay, that's better. Where was I? Yes, it's a very good tip. It's very useful, and it just boosts your odds of getting noticed right out of the gate because it pushes you to the front of the line. And not a lot of people do this, which means you can crack it open easier. Obviously, have a reel. Something for animation, which I found was really encouraging. My reel was something I could put a little bit of my personality into. It could be a little quirky. It could be fun. Still be professional and like contain my work and what I'm capable of, but I could have a little fun with it. And they're not gonna mind. Like it's just gonna stick out in their head that it wasn't like house music over a lot of shorts. I had Animal Crossing music in the reel that got me hired. And finally, apply. If you apply to a studio and they don't get back to you or say your needs don't meet like their needs at the moment, they're not going to blacklist you if you apply next time they're hiring. Like I said earlier, entertainment's an expensive medium. They will still go with the best person no matter what. If you're harassing them, sending them multiple applications like over like a few week period, obviously they're not going to want to talk to you. But a few months from now or half a year from now, if they're hiring again, shoot your stuff to them, update your reel, show them how you've grown, because that'll, again, it pushes you to the front of the line. And something that's, I mean, this is important for animation and film, or really any entertainment field, is that there's a very tightly knit relationship between skill, availability, and need. Skill meaning your skill, availability meaning when you're available, and the studio's need. And if any one of these things is not like aligned, it can mess you up. You can have the availability and the skill. In fact, that's what it is most of the time. And if the studio just doesn't have a need for you right now, they're not hiring, or maybe your skill set doesn't match up exactly with what you're doing, then that's kaput. Maybe you have the skill and they have the need, and you're not available during that time. Maybe you're already on another contract, or you're freelancing and they want you to work full-time or something like that. So these things all have to kind of work together if you want to get an employment opportunity with them. So I guess now we'll cover why compositing specifically. So what is compositing? For one, compositing is what I like to call the art of digital layering. You're fluffing up the final image, you have your background, you have your animation, and you're just adding all these sweet touches to kind of bring it to life. You're the assembly artist, effectively. And what I find is that it never stops being satisfying for me in that regard, because you have all these shots that pass through all these different people. With what I was working on over the summer, shots could pass through easily like 6 to 8 people before they're at my desk to put together. So you appreciate all the hard work that goes into what can sometimes be a very basic shot. And typically you're the last person to work on a shot. The editor might add some like color correction tweaks, but you're typically the last person that works on that. You're the one that finishes it off and sends it off, and that's the version of the shot people typically see, which I find is satisfying, being kind of like the last line of defense for a shot. As much as I like this, and one of the reasons I want to do some workshops, if there's enough interest for it, is that there's not many good online resources for this sort of thing. There are at least weren't when I was starting out, and I really don't think there still are. Just because animation compositing, although there's an increasing demand for it, there's not resources to meet that demand just yet. So if there's interest in that, I'd love to kind of fill that gap the best I can. Compositing work is typically done in After Effects or Toon Boom. I would say After Effects most of the time. Toon Boom maybe a quarter. Now this is for 2D. For stuff like for stuff like 3D, like your Disney films or really any 3D compositing, it's Nuke. Because Nuke handles like 3-dimensional shading and stuff like that. Nuke is a node-based compositing software. It's the industry standard software for anything visual effects related, just because of the way it can handle things like light and 3D and things of that nature. But for Toon Boom, it's After Effects and Toon Boom all the way. But starting out, you can get fine with After Effects. I don't know Toon Boom that well at all, and I don't have to because I don't get paid to work in Toon Boom. So I guess just as an example of what compositing a shot looks like, this isn't an animated example, but I guess just to ease us into what it is. So we have all these different things here. At the back here we have, I guess, what you could call the plate. That's like your farthest end shot. We've got a lot of stuff like, it looks like snow. We've got some sparks here, a lot of different effects that they're adding, again, to give more life to the shot, because this back plate right here would be a lot more boring if it didn't have all of these other things to accommodate it. And you see, like, when you're watching the shot, you're probably not thinking of all these extra things that are being added to it, but someone has to do that, and someone gets paid like a good amount to do that. And it's really satisfying to go from like that boring plate to your final shot with all these different effects on it. Here's an animated example of what comping a shot would look like. This is from Your Name. So let's see what we're looking at here. We have some pencil stuff here, so this would probably be like the original animation before it's digitally done. Then we look over here and it looks like we're just seeing just raw animation, raw background. Nothing else has been manipulated here. This is just the shot just with your image sequence and your background just plopped in. What the director of Your Name, Shinkai, likes to do is he likes to paint light. They'll have a shot and then he'll go into Photoshop and he'll paint over, like, I guess a screen cap of it, to see how they can add to that. So that would likely be what this is here. And then they just add a blending mode. Those of you that have worked in Photoshop already know how blending modes work. Looks like we've got another one here with this kind of rainbow gradient, and he adds that over just to give it this extra life. Like, you're already seeing when we go from here to here how much life, is in the shot now. If we go over here, this is a lot of what I guess is color manipulation, affecting the shadows, affecting the color of the shadows. A lot of what we do in compositing is what we call lighting treatments, which is just how we're getting a character to blend more into the background. Because although, like, this character here, when we're here, the grandma, the color palette's kind of there, but it could be better. And sometimes, like, if this was at night, this character would not at all fit in. You'd have to color it to look more teal, which is kind of where colorists might find they really like this sort of thing, because compositing typically does have a lot of color work, especially on like grand stuff like Castlevania or anime, although I wouldn't recommend working in anime. It pays pennies. And then we go down here. So she's in this forest, right? So what I imagine this is just a bit of a lighting treatment. I don't think this was animated. I'm almost positive this was just done in comp. But we're getting these lighting things on there. So when we go over here, she's got these nice little lights kind of coming in from the trees. And just that adds so much more depth from the shot. Like, think about how boring this one is over here. And when we get to over here, how much life that has. It really feels like she's there. And that's your job. Your job is to integrate and suspend disbelief. Because you're the last line of defense for a shot. You're the one that can add so much life to it. In a typically short period of time, which I find is very satisfying. So softwares you should know if you want to comp. After Effects, I'd recommend having an adept knowledge. You don't need to be a crazy pro. Like, I'm still not. Like, I can. There's still tons of functions in After Effects I don't know how to use, and that's fine, because like a lot of softwares, you're using the same amount of functions the most. It's really just about problem solving. When I say you need to know a bit of Flash, you don't need to be a Flash pro. You don't need to know how to animate in Flash. You really just need to know Flash to know how to like prep files. I would say Toon Boom in the same way. Toon Boom I say adept because if you decide to comp and you want to, you know, open your horizons and learn how to comp in Toon Boom, you should know a little bit about how it works. That's one of my goals for this year. Photoshop Novice as well. Again, it's usually just prepping backgrounds for animation. You'll get like a big, like anywhere from like 600 megs to like 1.5 gigabyte background, and you break it down to its base elements, your background and that sort of thing, so that it's way easier to work with in comp. So we're almost gearing towards the end here, and I kind of want to do a shot breakdown. This is one I've shown before. For those of you that might follow me, I have posted this one before, but I wanted to break down in more detail what's going on here exactly, because I had some people message me asking questions, how I did some things in this shot, and just to kind of emphasize things you should keep in mind when you're comping. And this was a learning experience for me because it taught me things I need to keep in mind going forward comping. So this is from the Nima opening I talked about earlier. This was actually the first shot we comped to completion for it, so this was done way back in February. And it's just her sitting by a bench. I don't have the camera motion with me, but it's just a zoom in, a slow truck in on her sitting on the bench. So if we break this down to its base components, so we start off with what I call the plate. This is just your skybox, effectively. We just have this kind of, it looks like it's a little after dusk when it's kind of at that like nice purple teal sky. We start adding some BG elements in there, so we have the bus stop and this post here. We add some more in there with the bench. The fences were actually isolated on their own, but there's no point splitting them up for the cases of this. Then we add in Nima. So this is Nima right out of animation. There's no effects on her, so you can see right off the bat it doesn't necessarily look right. She doesn't look like she's integrated into the background much at all, which is problematic, and that's where we come in. Some people were asking me about this. They go, how do you get from this to this? This is her shading, first of all. So this is a technique that's used in anime a lot, but it's also used in stuff like Castlevania, because Castlevania's technique uses from animation a lot of the time. We just call this data. This is shading. We have plugins so that you can change the color of this. You just change the blending mode. So I think we just slightly altered the color of this to make it darker. We set it to multiply, mess with the opacity a bit, and boom, she's lit properly. So you go from this to already adds a lot more dimension. Already looks like she's a little more there because she's lit. It's lit. We darken her a little bit. This is a subtle difference. It's really just a like gradient up, like a black or dark purple gradient. It's better to work in saturated colors, going upwards to darken her a bit. And then we add a bit of a highlight on her head to kind of her torso. And already she's looking way more integrated in here. She looks like she belongs here. She doesn't look as out of place because now she's been color corrected to fit in the environment. So again, color correction, keep that in mind. Then we add cats. One thing Ross really loves across all of his art, and especially the Nima trailer, he loves cats, he loves bus stops, and he loves petals falling, and all three of them are in this shot. But you'll notice over here we've got a bit of a problem. We have the cat animation, but his tail is poking out. We have some rough animation poking out here, and that's no good. People aren't going to like that. So all we really do is we just mask out part of the bus stop here and just layer it over. And luckily, because the cats aren't really moving in this shot, it's really just their tails that are moving. Super easy to do. It's accomplished with one layer, and immediately, there we go, all is right in the world. Everything is fine. We add what I like to call potato shadows. Potato shadows are just shadows you handle in comp. With something like Nima here, the shadows are done in animation. So an animator is going and animating the shadows. Sometimes they just don't have time to, or it's not necessary to comp shadows, or sorry, to animate shadows for small things like these cats. So these are just shape layers that we make. Like each of these is just one layer, and it just integrates them in. It makes them feel like they're really there, and it's a real subtle thing that you don't notice, but it helps fluff up the scene. This is just an extra BG thing that was stuck in there in the comp. I forget what these are. I know it's like a Japanese thing. It's these little like tickets that are on these sorts of benches. I don't know what they are, but it's just part of the background. We have a little shadow behind Nima here. I think this was just done with a shape. She's not moving either, so we literally just made a shape and it looks like she's there. And then I made not rose petals, but just cherry blossom petals falling in comp. And they're just kind of falling down. And After Effects has like fairly good particle systems that can deal with this. It's nothing like Houdini. Like you can't get like crazy fire simulation, but for the purpose of just flat petals falling, it works just fine for the shot. And here's where we get into some actual scene color correction. So this is literally just done with a triangle shape across the corners here, just to lighten it, give it some more depth. And then we do the opposite to the bottom. Again, this is a little after dusk. It's supposed to be a little purple just before nightfall. So, and this is just done the opposite way. This is a triangle that's just sort of a dark blue or a dark purple that we set to a blending mode. And it color corrects it, and it has a lot more depth. And then we just slap some more color correction over the whole thing to give it more of a purple look. We really want to emphasize that for this sequence. And then you basically have your finished shot. And the last thing we add is he wanted a bit of a dreamy feel for this shot. So we've got this sort of blur across the edges, and it just makes it feel a little more dreamy, a little more calming. So it's pretty crazy how you can go from this to all the way down to that within 3 hours, 4 hours. And a lot of that is just problem solving across along the way. So that doesn't stop getting old for me. It doesn't stop being satisfying going from like here all the way down to here. It's so much fun, which is why I love making breakdowns and things like that. So that's a general idea of things to keep in mind when you're comping. And for those of you that are interested in comp after this, again, reach out to me, because I can give you some material that's fairly similar to this. I can give you some material from a third-year Sheridan film that used a lot of the same techniques we used on Nima here, and let you play around with them, and we can walk through them together. Finally, here are some studios in the GTA. Yowza, who works on the new Looney Tunes shorts they're doing for HBO Max. They're doing Animaniacs right now. They do some cool stuff. Jamfilled, which if I remember right, does some advertising stuff, which is pretty fun because you can work on like some high production value stuff and kind of jump quickly. Guru, which does mostly 3D stuff, but they do some 2D stuff as well. They do Paw Patrol, things like that. Pipeline, which is based in, I think it's Hamilton. I forget exactly where they are, but they do some good stuff there. Brown Bag, Mercury Filmworks. Nelvana is like a media group that works with a lot of them. Nelvana does like Daniel Tiger, for those of you that have younger siblings. These are good studios to keep in your back pocket. Again, after this, do not just start adding all the recruiters willy-nilly without having anything to back it up. Like, have a reel, have some experience, cater your LinkedIn to showing interest in stuff like this, and then that will help you more than just like adding a bunch of recruiters. Something I will mention is that I mentioned before, animation's also kind of centralized. What animation tends to work on as well is also a bit centralized. Like, I'm relocating to Vancouver in like May-ish to work with Titmouse full time. Toronto typically, as far as animation goes, works more with children's content, which is fine, but if that's not necessarily your thing, maybe reconsider where you want to work. For me, I mean, the show I work on now is I can't say much, but it's not an adult show. But Toronto tends to work on, like, I would say, like, under 8 years old age group. Again, stuff like Daniel Tiger, Paw Patrol, things like that. Obviously, exceptions are in there, but it's just to keep in mind. And obviously, LA is just where, like, anything gets made. But although I'd love to work at LA at some point in my career, not for... We'll see how this election goes, and we'll see if I want to work in LA within the next 4 years. Okay, and we'll open this up to questions. You guys type some questions in there. I'm going to open up the survey and answer anything. There's not a ton of questions in there, but at least give some time for anyone. Just spam whatever questions you have, and I'll answer them to the best of my ability. Just give me a sec to open that up. I'm going to get a drink as well because I'm thirsty. So a lot of these just sort of said beginner and basics, so I hope I was able to cover a bit of that with some shot breakdowns and things to keep in mind. But if you want to learn some basic, like, inside After Effects stuff, again, reach out to me, and we'll make it happen. Someone said how to use After Effects to rotoscope, or some cool motion graphic stuff that we can use in things like end credit scenes. Again, if we do some After Effects stuff, I'm definitely down to show some stuff outside of comp, just some general After Effects stuff. I took DigiSuite 1 and 2. I do wish there was some more, like, real life application assignments now. There's a couple. It's usually like the exams that you have to do stuff like that. Like there's some like After Effects tracking stuff, but I'm definitely down to show some like real application stuff. Differences between film and animation in terms of the pipeline work and how to get in the animation in the industry in the first place. We already sort of covered that today. I hope I answer that to at least answer that to the best of my ability. I mean, I guess as pipeline goes, with animation you have like, you start with like your writers and your storyboards, and they're like this. They work together very closely. I'm gonna like move this slide a little bit as well so this is more interesting. You start with your animatics and your writers, and then sound will typically follow suit. Do your voice acting, everything like that, so you have like a finished animatic that you can watch. Anytime we get a new thing for where I work, we watch the animatic together. We got a question down there. I'll answer that in just a sec. And then it goes on to rough animation, and then they'll line it properly, so ink basically, even if it's digital, and then color animation, and then comp, and then edit, where again very minor adjustments are made. And I think sometimes like the final mix and edit sort of work in tandem. I know because with the thing I was working on, I know there was progress being made in sound, like even as we were still churning shots out. I think it's partially because like for things like music and really polishing those off. Someone asks, did you start learning this? Jamie asks, did you start learning this while at Sheridan, or did you start learning beforehand? That's a good question. I didn't know a ton about After Effects going into BFTV. I would say I'm primarily self-taught in that regard. I mean, University of YouTube. I initially wanted to go into visual effects, so I obviously integrated that into, I mean, I still integrate that into a lot of what I do at Sheridan. I like to think with visual effects in mind a lot of the time, and I think that just exercises my brain to be working in After Effects. And I think it just gives me like a bit of a unique perspective in the room to be thinking like how we can fluff up shots with new techniques. So I hope that answers your question. Someone asks about 12 basic principles of animation. That's not necessarily what we do in comp. That's more like actual like animating and drawing. But 12 principles of animation, if you're at all interested in that, I'd definitely recommend Alan Becker's series on that. I worked for Alan Becker for a bit. He's a nice guy. He's very quiet. But he has a 12-part series on that. He's the guy that does those, I don't know if you've ever watched those like animator versus animation videos. He does all of those. But he had a gaming channel as well that I edited for like a year. That covers most of the questions here. I'm just double checking. Oh, someone asks the process of creating your own animated series. That's a good question. So it's gonna vary studio by studio. I know the studio I work at, Titmouse, they have producers in-house who will buy shows. And I'd imagine they just have connections where they can like go to a streaming network or some network and be able to sell it to them, meaning they have pull. And they've already made it clear that I was able to sit in on a workshop with them shortly after I started at Titmouse where they talked about pitching a show. And someone asked like, do you need an art background to be able to pitch? And they said, absolutely not. They said the most important thing, and places are going to be different if you have something that's deliberately very stylized. It's going to be a little different, but the thing they care about most is like, it's the stuff you hear already. The writing, the characters. They phrased it in a way where it's like, your character should be so sound that like the person you're talking to should be able to essentially roleplay as them, as if they were that character. They should be that like identifiable already. Like if I tell you what like any like Simpsons characters, like you can immediately start like rolling out things like even if they didn't say, like that character would say. So that's really what they cared about most. Having art direction maybe helps, but typically producers on a show are going to want to have some hand in the writing or the development. Here's what they said. They said, if you're pitching for something at Titmouse, we know it's going to look good by the end of it. I don't know if you guys have checked out, like Midnight Gospel does a beautiful style. We know we can make it look good, but can we make it feel good? Can we make it identifiable? They talked about not chasing trends. Don't be like, it's like Rick and Morty, because there's already Rick and Morty. And if you're gonna do that for something. Do that for like two very different things that you can still prove there's a demographic for. They use Metalocalypse as an example, being like, Metalocalypse cracks a niche that you don't hear about a lot, but it's very there, and people who like Metalocalypse love Metalocalypse. I think there was one that was unfortunately canceled recently. I think Adult Swim's trying to pick it up. Oh, what's it called? I can't remember. Venture Bros. I know that has like a big following as well, and it cracks a niche. So be willing to crack a niche, but also be willing to prove why that niche exists, or if it exists in the first place. Is there any videos or classes you recommend for someone who's a beginner comp or software like After Effects? For stuff like compositing animation, there are virtually none that I can see that I would recommend to you. Usually it's for very, very basic Flash animation. That is not stuff that would like get you hired. Really, like, if you're interested in comp, reach out to me, because I'm confident I can get you ready with around if we do like one workshop a week or one workshop bi-weekly, I can get you ready in at least 3 to 6 weeks, to the point where you could go to the animation students and say you're willing to comp like even as little as like 10-15 shots on their stuff, just to get some experience. That's real material. Don't take on too much, especially for the third years doing core, but I'm confident I can help you out to the best of my ability to get to that point where you could competently go to the students and work with them. And they're great to collaborate with. Like, and I love my film people. I love collaborating with animators because they're so weird and so strange, and they have the most outlandish ideas. It's something I always say BFTV should borrow some a little bit. You know, be wacky. Like, we're a lot of the stuff that BFTV students typically like is wacky and like strange stuff. So the stuff you should want to make should typically reflect that. Not saying it's to be exactly the same, but you know, I feel like that makes the most sense. Like, your personality and the tone of things you typically like should fit with the ideas you want to put out there into the world, the things you want to pitch maybe. Like, I definitely like to pitch to Titmouse. I wouldn't do it soon because I'm 21 and no one's gonna buy a show from a 21-year-old. But if I was there for like 5 years, there's nothing to lose by pitching, and there's everything to gain. Because someone asked as well, like, can I pitch more than once? Do I really have one shot with a student? And they go, hell no. You can pitch as many times as you want, and they'll hear out. Don't spam them. And also, I do want to say, do not email Titmouse with pitches. Like, they emphasize, like, pitch if you work for the company, which is typically how it will be. Like, if you work at Disney, they have a policy, anyone can pitch a thing. A lot of studios typically have that. So if you find you like a studio, definitely consider pitching something if you've been there for a while. Unless we've got any more questions, we'll start to wrap it up for today. I hope this was fun. I hope there's some good information. But unless there's any other questions, we'll call it a day. I'll give it like another minute or two if anyone has any more questions. I hope everyone's doing well. Hope everyone's safe. And I hope today was at all informative. I know it's a lot of information. I'll be giving everyone the slides for this after the fact to peruse. No problem, Zachy, you sweet boy. I hope this was at least more enjoyable and engaging than what we will likely get in a few weeks through Zoom call. Yeah, I hope this was fun and lighthearted. This was at least what I would consider my take on online learning. Online learning via Twitch. And we went for an hour. That's about as long as I wanted us to go. So we're pretty much on time today. That's pretty good. It's a little after 3, but we got started a little after 2. Okay, so I guess we'll call it a day there. If you liked this, feel free to send me a message if you'd be interested in some After Effects stuff. If it's for like 2 or 3 people, I probably won't, but if it's like anywhere from like 5 to 10, like we'll make it happen and it'll be fun. I'd probably do it over some sort of, we're gonna keep doing workshops like these in the future. Like I was saying, like if there's enough interest for it, particularly for After Effects stuff, definitely. But again, if it's for like 2 or 3 people, maybe not. But if it's like anywhere from 5 to 10 that just want to do After Effects together, maybe I do it in a stream like this. Maybe it would be in a call where we can like exchange questions faster. I don't know. That would really come down to vote, because I have no preference either way. I wouldn't use Zoom, but I would use Google. I just find that like Google and Zoom lags a lot when you share screens and stuff, so it's just easier. Like I find there's a good response time on this. And After Effects wouldn't be super different, so I don't know. But anyways, we'll call it a day there. Thank you for everyone that showed up. I appreciate the questions. Make sure to give feedback. I'd love to hear anyone's thoughts on this after the fact. Yeah, stay safe. I hope everyone has a great year for the 3rd years. I'm really excited to see what you guys do. And for the 4th years, pick a god and pray, because it's going to be an interesting year.